My name is Michael Erlewine. Some of you may know me from my Facebook stuff. How many Facebook people are here? Okay, quite a few. What I would like to do is, and again, I'm not sure what you need to hear, but I've been studying this for 58 years. I'm 77 almost. There's a lot I've learned, and there's a lot I've learned that I don't do. And then there's some meta things that I've learned that you might not want to hear, but it's what I do. So let's just talk for a second. A lot of my techniques, of course I learned all of the general astrology, and I just donated a few years ago the largest astrological library in America, probably the world. It went to the University of Wisconsin as part of their permanent collection, so that it will be there for everyone from now on.
Thank you.
And I also donated all the duplicates to some place in, I think it's Portland, and then I had 1,800 extra American astrology magazines that went to Ken Irving, if you know who Ken Irving is, who does American astrology. And then I had 1,500 copies, extra copies of Del Horoscope that went to Philip Graves, who's a curator of astrology books in, I think it's in Great Britain. And a lot of other stuff. I've been slowly, but I'm not just an astrologer. I assembled the largest collection of music data in the world. And it's now doesn't belong to me, it's All Music Guide, and one of the two largest databases of films. Every film casting character, and the largest largest collection of rock and roll concert posters. And that went to the University of Michigan Bentley Historical Library and out to a new place in San Francisco that's dedicated nonprofit for poster stuff. And my music collection, which was 700,000 CDs, went to Ann Arbor. So I know a lot about music, and I published many books on music. And when I was young, I played music. I traveled with Bob Dylan, and I played with Jerry Garcia, and I opened for Cream, and Iggy Pop was my drummer for a while before it was pretty well known. So I've done a lot of stuff. But what I'd like to do here is just talk to you. There's some things I'd like to say that would benefit astrology in general, but I also have a number of unique techniques that no one did before I did them. Now, what do you think you would like to hear? Maybe, and also we can interact. What? Did someone say something?
No, just keep going. You're doing great.
Okay, so I could go. This is not an hour and a quarter. Is not a lot of time, right? So, and I don't know how to stop this thing from getting tired. Let's see if I can just bring this up again. Maybe got.
Do you have a microphone?
I don't.
Get your microphone.
They don't have a system. But, like, in 1976, I did a book called Astrophysical Directions. So it's the first time that anyone had taken all of the deep space points, like quasars, pulsars, organized all of the fixed stars into groups by different kinds of stars, like bright blue stars and old red stars, and then transferred them into astrological notation, an ecliptic latitude and longitude. And now I redid the book. It's called Astrology, and you should have got a card. Did you all get a card? Yes. That's just where you can download all of my books for free. There's 24 books on astrology. There's 46 books on Dharma meditation, and then a lot of other books on posters, and also a lot of books on I'm also a well-known photographer of flowers close up. So I like flowers. I like plants. So what do you want to hear? Do you want to hear 5 minutes on some of the basic techniques?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we just talked about this guy. This is filled with diagrams. The local group of galaxies, where our galaxy, the Milky Way, is, like late Sagittarius, and where everything is in space. People also always asking me, and I'm going to sit down some because I'm old, and I've had a lot of illness in the last 2 years, so I'm just hanging in here. Being here is like, wow. Not like home, right? I use the tropical zodiac, but I can just as easily use the sidereal zodiac. But I don't care about the zodiac so much. What I care about is where everything is. And in that book, in this book, I show you where everything is. And like everything's in the direction of late Sagittarius, but really everything, and that's where the galaxy is. But the super galaxies, which are like a rain of galaxies, is in late Virgo and early Libra. So once you know this stuff, like the super galaxy center and the center of the galaxy are almost 90 degrees apart. If you would study those, they themselves will generate the meanings of the 12 signs. I mean, impeccably. And I try to lay that out. But all of this takes a lot of work and study, and a lot of it's just too busy. Let me try to go down to another book. But do you have anyone have any questions on this one? No questions? Okay. This is a really interesting technique. And I published it in NCGR papers, I don't know, 40 years ago. Never heard back a word from anyone. So, obviously, but let me tell you what it is, because it's not hard to understand. If you look at the position of a planet on your geocentric chart, and you look at that position where the planet really was on the helio chart, they vary. They're either identical or, and this is the thing that you want to grasp, the helio position never changes. It's just steady going ahead. There's no retrograde. It's just but the Earth position from where we see it seems to run ahead of the zodiac from the helio position or behind it. So the key idea is that when I say ahead, I mean later in the sign where it's moving, that it hasn't reached yet. So I interpret this as that it's in the future, or it runs behind where we are, helio-wise, which it's in the past. So by studying that, you can say, for instance, I call it burn rate because the difference between your heliocentric and geocentric positions is what you have to do to bring them together in your mind. And like I have a very high burn rate for Mercury, it's way, way, way behind. As far as behind it, it's behind the sun as far as you can. So, but it's direct. So I'm not in the past looking in the past. I'm in the past looking up at the future. Or I could be in the future looking really future-oriented, or I could be in the future but looking back at the present. Now, that's what I'm saying. In this time, we can't do this. Your mind can't grasp this too simply, but I'm trying to plant a seed. The seed would be, it's a wonderful technique because somebody can have Mars that's in the future, right? And they're very future-oriented. They're not very practical. Or they can have it in well, unless these people just left, did they? I think I might have scared a couple of people out. So I'll try not to be as scary if I can. That's why, I have a booth in the marketplace. You can come and talk to me. Now, I ended up doing like lots of little mini readings. I didn't mean to do that, but some of you need it. So, some of you don't know what your heliocentric chart is. You've never even looked at it. And to me, and there's another book, there's several books. Let me go. So anyway, the retrograde book, I would like one of you at least to contact me and say that you grasp it and just how useful it is to be able to see somebody's a dreamer. Their mind's in the future. The Mercury's in the future. They can't, when it's conjunct the sun, it's at the center. Or when it's, or are they overly concerned with the past? So, yeah, let's see what else.
Wait, so are you saying, like in the chart, if it's it already passed the sun, it took the sun's consciousness and it's not combust, it's past.
If it's not combust, it's either pushing into the future or retrograding back from the future or in the past and directly going. So it's totally simple once you grasp it. But if you are an interpreting person, if you have clients, this is so helpful to be able not just to say, well, you have this retrograde. It tells you the kind of retrogradation and which pass. There are 3 passes. You know, there's going over, there's going back over it, and then there's finally going over. So somebody that's gone over it 3 times is going to have a different quality than someone who's just going over it for the first time. They're pushing it. So try this technique. Now here's another one that I gave a lecture before, or talk, whatever it is. I don't like talks. I like... my best friend was Charles A. Jane, who was a great astrologer. And he and I invented what was called ACT. And at every conference like this, UAC and AFA, we would have a panel discussion that ran all day long, one after the other, where everyone could participate. We had a moderator, so it couldn't just participate too much, but we would try to have a conversation. And I mean, to the limits of my physical ability, those of you who can chat me up in the marketplace will look at your helio chart. And so let's talk about that for a minute, because I think that's the heart of a lot of what I've done and do. When I was, I'm the first person that ever programmed astrology on a computer and shared it with others. There are other people who programmed it, but they didn't make those programs available to anyone but themselves. So I started Matrix Software, and in an event, but it didn't start out even me making money. It was me copying cassettes and sending them out for free. In fact, one really famous astrologer wrote me a nasty letter saying that I had no right to charge for those cassettes more than the postage and the price of the cassette. Because he didn't think of something like this. He didn't have his hands into it. He couldn't make any money from it. So, but when I was doing that, I was programming for astrologers different things. So one of the things I had to program was the heliocentric chart. I didn't know heliocentric chart from Adam, right? So I made it, and then I looked at it, and I said, oh, wow. And I took all of my geocentric knowledge, which was pretty good, because I'd been studying it for a long time, and I tried to apply it to the heliocentric chart. For instance, my Mars in my natal chart, Geo, is in Aries. So I get hot. But in the helio chart, it's in Aquarius. So I'd say stuff to myself like, well, I got a hot temper, but maybe it does some Aquarian good. Right? No, but this kind of stuff, it's what we do, when we get to know a chart. But then something started to happen to me. I started not to focus on that. I began to realize that the pattern, and what I call a whole chart pattern, which is just connecting all the way around the chart, bringing out major Ptolemaic patterns. Squares, T-squares, grand crosses, trines, mystic rectangles, wedges, and so forth. They seem somehow much more stable or powerful than if the same thing was replicated in my geochart. So after a while, I stopped trying to do all of my thinking geocentric techniques. And it was like, to me, it was like Atlantis was arising. Something began to come out that I'd never seen before, and I said, wow. And then I looked at my patterns in the helio, which were very different than my geo patterns, just because the Earth is looking at the solar system in our geochart, but it's at a weird angle, so we're not seeing it correctly. But if we look down on like from the helio chart, then we're seeing where the planets really were and the patterns that the planets make. So what happened to me, which I think was life-changing for me, because over time I began to transmigrate my identity from my geochart to my helio chart. And before I knew it, I'd, like they say, the dewdrop slips into the shining sea, from the Bhagavad Gita. Before I knew it, I was all helio. That the helio is the mother. The Earth is the child. And so I was with my mother, so to speak, and I never felt so real, right? I never felt more like myself. And then over time, the way I look at it is that 400 and some years ago, Copernicus pointed out to all of us, astrologers then, that everything doesn't revolve around us, which we thought, but that we revolve around the sun. And from that moment, astrologers split. And the astronomers took two charts, the geo and helio, and they walked into the future. I think astronomy and botany are the oldest academic disciplines. And they made a good living, and they're considered right livelihood. But the astrologers clung to the geo chart only. Even now, maybe some of them use it, but it's coming. But not really. They use, like I did, the geocentric techniques on it, but they haven't been empowered. And I believe that astrology and modern astrology, the reason that we don't make more money and the reason that we're not more accepted as a right livelihood, when I was learning to program, I went to the bank to try to get a loan for my first programmable calculator, and I was so proud to be an astrologer. I said, well, I'm an astrologer. He brings out a chart and he says, well, astrology is right above migrant workers in our risk. We're not going to give you a loan. But I got it. I went back and I got it finally. So my point is that I feel that astrology and astrologers need to know their helio chart because they need to have an empowerment that will allow them to, and astrologers, even here, I'm talking to many people, they're saying, the society, the public doesn't appreciate us. And what I say to them is, we're not producing something and giving it to them enough to be appreciated as much as we would like and to make the kind of living that would be considered a right livelihood. I hate to say that, but I think that's true. For me, it changed because of what I'm just telling you, that I began to identify myself intricately with helio, but it doesn't mean I just use that chart. I use that chart and another chart, and I invented a technique called local space. Local space is a relocation technique mostly, but it's looking at the same planets in the same moment in the horizon system. That means if my dad picked me up as an infant and walked outside at my birth, saw Venus in the sky, and there was a great circle running right through Venus, right through all the stars in that direction, but also cities on Earth. And so...
Is that just what's visible?
What?
Is that just what's visible when you're born?
Well, no, it's not just what... I say there may be something visible, might be a dark night. Dark of the moon, you don't see anything, but the lines are there. So, what I'm saying is that there are many charts. They're like algebras. If you use an algebra, it brings out something, but it suppresses everything else. So each of these is a different view that if you triangulate them, you're going to get a three-dimensional idea of yourself. It's much more real. So this technique, I've written 2 books on this, and I talked about this in the last lecture, but I didn't talk about it in terms of marriage and partner. My first book is called StarTypes on this subject, Life Path Partners. This is the most effective way that I've done, and I've done, years and years. I made my living as a counselor with astrology, like some of you may do, and then even since then, I'm constantly redoing it because I just constantly doing it because people want it, and they even come to my home. Sometimes people show up and I never have seen them before. One guy showed up, never saw him before, and stayed for 2.5 years. Well, we had a whole house full of Sanskrit scholars, Hare Krishna astrologers, astrophysicists. Robert Schmidt of Hindsight came to our center, lived there for a few years, and that's our conversations is why he became an astrologer. But there are many, and we put on 36 different conferences over the years, a lot of them on Tibetan Buddhism, but a lot of them on astrology. So I also run the Dharma Center for 30 years. So more important to me now than my astrology is meditation and learning to clarify my mind. And that's another thing that I would say. If you came to me privately and we just had a heart-to-heart, I would say the following, and I'll give you an analogy. When all the lamas in Tibet, through the diaspora, had to leave Tibet and fled it, in the 1980s, they had nowhere to go. And we had a center, and we would invite them, and they would come. I'm talking about not the Dalai Lama, although I've met the Dalai Lama personally, but the ones just under them. They would come and stay at our center, sometimes many times. And I would pester them with astrology, and I wrote an 800-book astrology that you can have, an 800-page book. And I would try to find out what they were doing. And finally, my teacher, who's 95 years old and doesn't speak English, but I've been with him for 36 years, and I'm a knowledge student, he finally came to our town. He took pity on me and he gave us a teaching. I think it's the only one he ever gave on astrology, but he knew that inquiring minds want to know, right? That idea. So what he said to me is, Michael, astrology is one of the limbs of the yoga, but it's not the root. And this is a little disappointing because to me astrology was almost like a religion. I mean, very similar. And so, okay, and what I came to understand that to mean, and this is something I'll share with you that I think is important, but I don't know, you may find it offensive, but it's not really offensive, but it's the truth. So, if you imagine the world as a sphere covered with water, with winds blowing, and a little sailboat on that sphere blowing about, what astrology can do is help us set the sails to go from a place we're very uncomfortable to a much better way of living. And that's what we do. But what it can't do, it can't ever get us off the globe. Astrology is what's called a dualistic. It's always going to be working with samsara. Do you guys know the idea of samsara and nirvana? Well, then let's talk about that briefly. Well, samsara is this world of cyclic world we live in, sometimes pretty vicious. We're up today and we're not up tomorrow, right? Up and down and up and down and in and out and around and stuff like that. Nirvana is the enlightenment of that. But I used to think that nirvana was like, I was raised Catholic and was an altar boy and went to Catholic school and horrible stuff. For me it was tough. Well, all the stories of being hit by rulers and stuff like that, totally true. And also I was bad, There is that. So, now your laughter blew my mind right out.
Nirvana.
Yeah, okay, so that I thought that nirvana was like heaven. It was a place I wanted to get to, right? But the Buddha said, no, there is no other place than this one. There's no place that you're going to get to, but there is nirvana. I'll say what they say it is. Nirvana is the realization of samsara. Nothing more. You don't go anywhere else, but you realize everything about where you are now, which mostly we don't. So it was a big lesson to me to understand that astrology was a tool, a wonderful way to benefit other people, which is, I think, how we use it. But the Dharma would take us on that sphere to the center so that we saw all of the periphery and we realized it for what it was and knew how to absolutely use it. So I would have you think about that because I think it's very important. Back to this, using your heliocentric chart type, which is a pattern like a T-cross, but it doesn't, very often it's not what you're used to thinking of you in your natal chart. This came as a big shock, even to many people here who come to my booth. A lot of trouble, or people crying and stuff when they realize that what the helio described was what they always thought that they were, but could never find in the geochart. And so I'm not trying to overly promote it. I'm simply saying that if you like depth astrology, what you search for in the geochart, I found, you may not, in the helio. I could see it dimly in my geochart, but it's what I hungered for. But I'm totally satisfied in what I found in the heliocentric chart. And this is the most important point, I began to look at these types. I began to look for, I make lists of all my friends that would do helio charts, like all the people I didn't like, the people I didn't get along with, right? I made all their charts, and I was shocked to find, this is helio, that they were all like my chart. That I didn't like myself, which I didn't at the time, and so I didn't like them. And so I was able, through that, to begin making friends with them and making friends with myself. So the most powerful counseling tool, if you do relationships, and there's a whole book called StarTypes, Life Path Partners you can download, shows you exactly, there's two kinds of, it breaks all these patterns into groups, what I call families. There's a family called the lovers, people who are the lovers. There's one called the loved ones, people who are more happy just being loved. And then there are people who are a combination of both. And then there are people, what I call relational types, who just can't get enough relations. They cannot meet enough people, go enough places, and stuff like that. But it's all laid out really, and I designed like tarot cards for every pattern. In fact, I went through kind of a deepening time in my life, and I designed 13,000 tarot cards. Think about that. But not just for astrology, for Dharma stuff, for like the 60 cycles of the element and animal in the Chinese zodiac. I also learned Chinese astrology, Tibetan astrology, and Vedic astrology, and programmed all of them. So I'm pretty well grounded, I have pretty good grounding. If you love relationships and you want to help people understand whether they're getting into a relationship where there's attraction by opposite, or they're getting into a relationship where it's like monks and nuns, where they're happy to be with someone like themselves, and that they'll have to find the attraction through what they mutually love and do. But it's the most beautiful way that I've ever discovered to handle relationships, and I counsel for years until many times I would never even get to the geocentric chart, because the helio was so satisfying. And you guys are counselors, right? Some of you? Well, if you counsel, you know very well that in a counseling session, there is a point where the client often cries or gives up. And that's the point when, the tears come down and stuff like that. It's basically that they let go, but then they take a new grip on what they have. You can't escape what you have to do. But you can come away from a reading with a new purchase, a new sense of ready to go back and try again. That idea. So check me out and give me a lot of trouble if you don't find it true. But if you can learn this technique, it's so easy and so beautiful. If you like relationship, and I think the two things I'm really good at is relationship counseling and vocational counseling. And both of them I do mostly with helio. Although I was a specialist in counseling LSD people, because I'd had LSD and had real trouble with it, and it took me 30 years to come out of it. 30 years to balance my mind. And so all those people came to me because I could help them give up feeling so unique. That only they. Right? No, I'm very disappointing to people. So I hate, and I just did one this morning. Some person who was so disappointed in me that I couldn't agree with them, that I would just be what I was, and this happens, doesn't it? We all do this. Some of them take their marbles and go home. Any questions about this technique before we go on to something else? You got it?
No.
Got the idea?
You mentioned two books on local space and relocation technique. You mentioned StarTypes and another one?
No, I said local space is local space.
Okay.
There's one book.
All right.
And there's many people who have written other books on it, but not me. And the relationship, there's the book Dharma Chart, Karma Chart, and there's the book StarTypes, which is what I call the patterns, Life Path Partners. And it's just like that. So let me see if we can get some stuff back here. I hate it does this. Oh, we won't do this. Yeah, I have written a whole book on Tibetan Earth Lords, which are the lords of the earth in Tibet. They have every spring, mountain, a little cranny or nook has a spirit, a guardian. And it's fascinating. These people, the Tibetans, live by it. And I've been to Tibet twice on pilgrimage, and once to meet His Holiness the Karmapa. And I took my whole family, all but one. I have 4 kids, 8 grandkids. We all went to Tibet. It was, and I have a whole book on it, of course. You know, but it was wonderful. It was beyond imagination for me. So, also, if you like Feng Shui, I wrote a whole book on Feng Shui because I understand Feng Shui pretty well. But one of the highest lamas, his name is Taisitu Rinpoche. He's one of the heart sons of the Karmapa, came twice to our center. And one time, he was so wonderful, and he took us through a walk through our own home. And he pointed out the Feng Shui, and he loved Feng Shui. And I don't know what happened to me, but somehow I received his empowerment. Somehow I ended up getting an enormous amount out of him, so that I wrote this book, which is a lot of traditional Feng Shui, actually. So these books aren't necessarily, they're just covers, right? So another thing that, it's not unique to me. Dane Rudger did it. L. Edward Jandro did it. If you're not using full phase aspects, and especially if you're an interpreter, if you're counseling people and you don't use full phase aspects, you're missing literally half the quality of what you could offer. And if you don't know what a full phase aspect is, it's simply like let's just use the moon. Constantly people asking me to pick a time to have a party or to have a big celebration, stuff like that. I could pick the square of the moon, the first quarter moon, right? First quarter moon is the square from the full. Or I could pick the latter square, the fourth quarter. I think we could get together as astrologers that you wouldn't have a party on the last quarter, but you would between the first quarter and full moon, especially just before the full moon. Well, we got that, but we are not using it as a group on every other kind of planet. Every planet is either waxing or waning, and it's totally different. So this book literally takes the 16 major aspects that people use, and it shows you by interpretation exactly the difference between an applying sextile and a separating sextile, and every other aspect. And if you're not using that in consulting, you're just missing, you're giving them like half the truth. Instead of, it's either coming to be or it's not coming to be. And the way we come to be is varied. There's thinking about it, there's learning to do it, there's starting to do it, there's building it, all up to like the full moon point in a cycle. Or we're at the full moon and we're realizing what we just went through. We're starting to withdraw and to draw some conclusion from what we experienced, or we're trying to collapse it into a nutshell so we can remember it. If you're not doing that with every aspect, you're literally... anyways, some of our best astrologers use it. I use it. And I swear by it. Here's a whole book that will walk you through it. And all my books are totally illustrated. With just not beautiful illustrations, but, clear illustrations. So, any questions on full phase? Well, you guys are questionless.
I have a question. Did you write a book about Helio?
Tons of them.
Okay. And which titles?
Well, the ones we just said, Dharma chart, Karma chart is all Helio. Here's another book right here of Helio. This is going to be hard to talk about. I first did this on a mainframe computer way back because there were no home computers. But what this is, and my dear friend, the person I learned the most from in astrology, and I just had this guy that had a fit about me this morning, And I try to explain to him that no other astrologer, although I love Dane Rudger and Noel Till and all these people as people, did I learn from as much as I learned from Theodor Landscheid. Theodor Landscheid was a Supreme Court Justice of Germany, but he was a powerful, powerful astrologer. He would come, and in fact I sent him in 1978 his first computer because they didn't have them over there yet. And he did all of his famous weather calculations and stuff on it. But one of the things, and he did one on geocentric nodes, a program and stuff like that. What I did was take all of the orbits heliocentrically and look to where do they intersect. They have nodes, just like we have the nodes of the moon. They all have nodes so that when you were born, you were either in one planet in one orbit, you were either inclined to the other planet, or you were at a square point or disinclined. So it literally gives you a list, and it's all, you can also look it right up in the book. And before I forget, same with burn rate, you have an ephemeris in the back that will give you, and the same with StarTypes, or I give you your patterns in the back of the book for every date. So I'm doing it for people, right? And so you don't have to do what I had to do. So, because you can just go right to the good stuff. And just it took me all day to calculate a chart for the local space on paper before calculators. But you now can do it in a tenth of a second. So, anyway, if you look at the structure of the nodal system created by the orbits of the planets, you end up with an incredible, like I have a daughter who's a pretty famous singer in the Midwest. She has an incredible amount of disinclinations. But it's not like that's bad. She's just so picky. But she's really, really good. I mean, in the sense that her pickiness is exquisite. I mean, if she gives you a tie, I don't wear ties, but if she brings you something, it's the best, because she's not going to take any of the others. She's not going to take anything less than the best. So, me, I have no disinclinations. I'm all inclined. I mean, and my wife could tell you that too. That I'll eat this, I'll eat that. Well, now I have had a lot of heart trouble, so I'm not allowed to eat anything but like Whole Foods and stuff like that. It's just fine. I mean, well, it's either that or I won't live. So I say, well, which one? But in the back of this book is a list of where all these, what I call interface points are. And now here's the part that I can't explain. There's such a thing as ineffableness, something that can't be put into words. Of all the techniques that I've ever done, and I've done all the ones that have been programmed as well, first thing I do is check out my own chart. This is the single most profound astrology I have ever seen. In fact, I have not ever reached the point that I feel that I got to the end of it. I mean, it's always true of everything. You never get to the end until you get to the end. But this is so deep. Like the things that, when you look at your inclinations, and then sometimes they're just exact, and it just gives you such an understanding of the deepest part of yourself that I've ever had. And it's all in the book with stuff in the back. It's a little hard to understand because we're getting away. These are techniques I learned early on. This is another one of those things you may not want to hear, but early on I learned, and also with my Dharma training, to use the mind itself. The mind itself, every thought, word, and deed, invention came from the mind. That's where it started. So our mind, the Tibetans call it the wish-fulfilling jewel. And so that it is, that if you learn to go into the mind, and the mind is filled with all the treasures, it's not like it's empty from everything that's been till now. It's full of astrological treasures, like the ones I'm sharing with you, that came out of my mind. No one taught me this. There was no book about it. I thought of it, but I don't think of me being special to think about it. I think of and the Tibetans teach you this, that they call it Dharma, hidden treasures. They call them mind treasures. In fact, let me see what time we have. Yeah, we have enough time. I'll tell you a story. In 2004, I was invited to go with my teacher, who's now 95, to Tibet. and to China. And we went to, in China, a place called Wutaishan. Wutaishan is 5 mountains in the shape of a number 5 die, like on a dice, 4 mountains with one in the center. And we climbed each of those mountains and did puja in one day. This is what you're supposed to do, but it's really grueling. But we did it. But what was explained to me by this teacher was that this, Michael, he said, this was where astrology first entered our Earth system in time. And how that worked was the great Bodhisattva, Manjushri, who was also the Bodhisattva of astrology and the Kalachakra, appeared in China at Mount Wutaishan as a young youth. And from the top of his head poured the 84,000 astrological dharmas. So they're actually talking about astrology, which they don't talk a lot about. And he gave them to humankind, to mankind. And we loved them. We loved them so much that we neglected our Dharma practices. This is how the story goes. And so Manjushri took them back. And then, have you heard of Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche? Guru Rinpoche is the second Buddha, it's called. He interceded. He went to Manjushri because he could somehow. I wish I could do it. And he said, please give us these astrological termas back, these teachings. He thought about it and he said, okay, I will, but I'm going to hide them. I'm going to put them under rocks and in caves, but mostly I'm going to put them in the mind like time-release capsules. And in time, each one will ripen and someone could go in and find it. And if you want to study how that works, and these are called tertans. These are treasure finders. And they find a treasure, but first they must understand it. But it's like a vision. They have a vision. It imprints. Then they have to realize it. They have to experience it and live it. It can take a long time to practice it before they realize it enough so they could give it to us. And they do this, and there's famous tertans. I've visited them in Tibet. I've seen many, many. And I've seen oracles. We could talk forever. But anyway, at Mount Wutaishan, when I left and came home to the United States, when the trip was all done, I went through a wonderful experience of all this stuff came out of me. I mean, if you ask me why I write so many books, that's part of it. It's because there's so many things that you can bring out of the mind. And that's why I sometimes am critical of people. I'm not against it, because I just had a wonderful interview with Lee Lehman, who I love dearly. And these are classicists studying Greek, Latin, Arabic, and stuff like that. Nothing wrong with it, but from my point of view, I don't have time or the kind of mind that wants to learn a language and go and try to do that. Plus, I don't know the language even if I learn it. I mean, I learned to read Tibetan, but not without a lot of trouble. And I still can't do it without books and stuff like that. But my point is that if you can't do that, you can learn to go to the mind itself and start using your mind. Your mind will deliver to you incredible stuff if you'll just give it a chance. I mean, but there's a whole technique to do it. But I'm going to blow my nose now, so. Sorry. Any questions about this? So anyway, interface is a profound technique that you can use. It's in some programs of ours, of Matrix. My company was Matrix. It's owned by David Cochran, my dear friend who worked for me and with me for many years. And they're carrying us on. And I'm retired because I'm tired. And I've had enough. And I'm doing more stuff than ever. I have a 100-foot garden of flowers. Now, how's that? So that's the kind of stuff I'm in. And I write on Facebook every day an essay. Almost every day. It's either on astrology or Dharma. Mostly on Dharma. Because to me the Dharma is the root and astrology is the limb. But I love astrologers and I love astrology. Any questions on interface?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you said that there was a technique to get the treasures from the mind, and did you write a book about that?
I haven't.
What's the technique? Quickly.
Well, yeah. It isn't quickly. How to say it? Let me just think for a second. maybe I could put it this way. The most important thing I ever did, years ago, I would go to, I was looking for teachers. And I would, especially during the 70s and the 60s, we would go to, I was raised in Ann Arbor. So all these teachers were there, all these people, Indians and Tibetans, and I would go to them and, sit with them. I sat just close to Alan Watts. He taught me something. What he taught me is that, God, this guy's more dense than I am. He doesn't get anything, right? I'm smarter than that, right? But that's a smart alecky one. But one time I was living where I live in Big Rapids, Michigan. I live on the edge of 900,000 square miles of national forest. So we're in a little tiny town, but it's very wonderful, nice air, and surrounded by water, right, everywhere. So, and I was busy working at Matrix Software, and a friend of mine called me from Ann Arbor, and he said, "Listen, Michael," he was always going to gurus, right? He said, "You got to see this Tibetan guy." And I said, "No, James, I'm a businessman. I don't do that anymore. I have a family. I'm not going to drive 3 hours. But thank you." And then a day or so later, just before dawn, I had a dream that I was driving to Ann Arbor to see this radiant Oriental gentleman. And I woke up and I just had a sadness in my heart that I wasn't able to do that stuff anymore. That didn't happen to me. I wasn't having those kind of experiences. My wife had the same dream, or a similar one. And there we were sitting up in bed. It was about, but maybe at that time it was about 7. And I called my friend in Ann Arbor who sleeps late and got him out of bed. Said, "I'm coming to see him." And he said, "No, sorry, he's leaving at 10. It's like a 3-hour drive. It's okay." And I said, "No, I'm not working today." And literally I got my kids with toothbrushes in hand, and they got in the car. We drove to Ann Arbor, and I met Khenpo Kata Rinpoche, and for days afterward we wandered around being nicer than we'd ever been to anyone, right? But don't worry, we got back to our nasty normal self. So, and anyway, I've been with him now for 36 years, and every year I drive 800 miles both ways to do a 10-day intensive on Mahamudra meditation. So I've done that for 30 years coming right up, and I've trained in that. And what I'm trying to say about all this is that the most important thing I ever have done in my life was sort of find my wife, which was a huge thing. And I, of course, love my children. We had home birth and home schooling and stuff like that. I'm an old hippie. And this is the story I'm going to tell you. So after meeting Rinpoche, we drove on the coldest night of the year. It was the week between Christmas and New Year's, which to me is like a scary week no matter what. You don't get any mail, you don't... But anyway, we drove through the coldest night with little babies. We had a 2-year-old. And we had to scrape, we're climbing this mountain. It's in Woodstock, New York, up in the mountains. Scraping with a cardboard scraper, trying to get up there, and it's dark, and the wind is blowing, and we didn't tell them we were even coming. Can you imagine? I don't even know what we're thinking. And so we went inside, and they got Rinpoche up. I don't know what. It was night. He came down. Of course, he's just as nice as he could be. He was always incredible. And I said, "Well, I've been an astrologer. I've done all this stuff." He said, "Well, I'd like you to learn meditation or something." I said, maybe I could, kind of skip meditation 101, right? Because look at all the good stuff I've been doing. And he says, "I know that you've never hurt anyone with your astrology."
You never what?
Hurt. Harmed.
Oh.
But in this case, I think it would be better for you to start at the beginning. And then he gave us a technique called Tong-Len. Anyone know Tong-Len?
Tong-Len?
Tong-Len. Exchanging yourself for others.
How do you spell that?
T-O-N-G, it's different, L-E-N, space L-E-N. So, and we went back to this little motel that had like one of those heaters in the wall, and we had our little kids. It was fierce outside. And the first thing we read in the book was that absorb from others all of the negative things in the world and send out from yourself everything good that you have. And we looked at each other and we said, whoa, this is the opposite of what the psychics taught me, to wash your hands after every reading and get that stuff out of you, right? So we're looking at it saying, no, what are we into? Here we are, 800 miles from home, little bitty babies, but our faith in Rinpoche, because he was so incredible as a being, and he is to this day. He's 95, and I'm going to see him this fall. We stuck with it, and he was absolutely right. I knew nothing about meditation, really. I mean, I was doing like relaxation meditation, because I'm uptight all the time. So even now, instead, I did go to the beginning and start at the very beginning, and they have a very, very rigorous. I don't know if any of you ever heard of the word Nundro? Yeah, you have? Nundro is, when I first heard about it, it's totally medieval in my mind. You do 108 full prostrations on the ground. Then you do 108,000 100-syllable mantra repetitions. Then you do 108,000 mandala offerings, very carefully placing sand on a copper disc and all these prayers. And then you do 108,000 guru yogas. And then you do, as part of one of them, 108,000 going for refuge and recognizing the Dharma. We did all that. When I was all done, I went to Rinpoche and said, I'm all done. And he says to me, he says, Michael, would you like to know? I said, what should I do? He said, Michael, would you like to know what I would do if I were you? Okay. I would like to. I said, I would do another Nundro. And we did. So I'm just saying, I put my money where my mouth was. And what I'm telling you is that years ago, I read a lot of books. I never got out of high school. I just couldn't stand it, and I just wanted to be in the world. But I've been successful as an entrepreneur. But I read Franz Kafka, his books, his short stories, but I also read his diaries. And there was one line in his diaries that stuck by me, kind of like that I just had to review and review and review till I understood it. And it was this line. He said, each line that I write, it already has perfection. I said, what's that? So what I finally realized is that Franz Kafka was not trying to learn to write, to be a better writer. What he did was made his mind better, so that everything he did had the seal of his mind on it. You understand what I'm saying? That and so my advice to you, of all advices, would be the best thing that I ever did was undertake the process of seriously learning to meditate, which means there's an incredible number of purification practices, like I described a few to you, that do sound medieval and that are very hard for Americans to do, especially for me. But I did them. And at the end of all of that, you get the opportunity of what are called the pointing out instructions. And I took them many times. I had one of the highest lamas there is, take me into a room, sit me down, and try to point out to me the nature of the mind. I didn't get it. I was embarrassed, right? I tried to get it. I wanted to get it, but I didn't. But then years later, with a lot more training, I got a little something. And my advice to anyone who, I think to astrology in general, is that every step that you can take to improve the clarity of your mind, and that you can thin out your obscurations so that you can see beyond yourself, see through them, it's worth gold. It's worth, plus then everything you do will be, like my teacher used to say, it's not true because I say it, Michael. I say it because it's true. And so having the ability to use the mind and ask questions of the mind and get a definitive answer, or at least have your question no longer be there. You no longer have a question. What they call, in these advanced meditations, what they call insight meditation, vipassana, of which there are dozens of kinds, but this is a very special kind, especially profound, and can only be pointed out to you by a lama. You can never find it. It's like one of those paintings that have a picture in it. You will never find it unless someone shows you where it is. Then you'll always see it. So it's like that. So all the books I'm showing you are wonderful. And they're not wonderful because I wrote them. They're wonderful techniques. But they don't hold a candle to one step higher. It's like what I used to joke with myself. I joke with myself a lot. I say, well, it's all the difference in the world, Michael. It's minute, but it may be all the difference there is. So even a tiny step forward can give you so much more ability to master whatever you're trying to master. So any questions on that? There ought to be questions, right?
I'm just thinking I don't have enough time to do that left on this earth plane.
Well, you do have enough time to do that. You have all the time you have, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll give you a simple technique now that any of us can do. That in my experience of having done all these techniques twice, and then many others, this is the fastest way to clarify your mind. And I'm going to tell it all to you, and you can always write me or contact me about questions, because this is what I live for. Literally, nothing would make me happier than for other people to have found some of the stuff that I'm finding. And this is so simple that you don't have to go sit on a cushion and light a candle. You can do it while you work, while you walk, while you eat. And it's this: begin to be aware when you react. Someone gives you crap. I got crap given to me this morning. So, literally. And someone offends you, calls your name or snubs you, and you feel yourself reacting. Be aware of the reaction, but mostly be aware that it's your reaction. That you do not have to react that way, but don't even think that. That's a waste of time. All this technique is that, and I'm talking about finer and finer reactions, like, oh, I don't like the tie he's wearing, or I didn't like that hamburger. What?
Okay, so my question is like we all go through life with our north and south node, and depending on wherever you're on your spiritual journeys or lifetimes, we all, attract or experience things that we wish and that we do not like.
Totally.
It's karma to clear. So when it appears that a lot of things are happening that aren't pleasant or of your preference, and then you just have to say you're clearing some Dharma from other life, not Dharma, but clearing, cleaning. It's
a purification practice.
Yeah.
No doubt.
When this happens, you just have to.
But what's the question?
The question is that they say the higher you are on getting somewhere out of your mind, that you might be attracting harder lessons here on Earth.
Okay, I'm not getting much of a question, but I'm getting an idea. So let me just say this, that I'll repeat kind of what I said, is that the fastest way to remove obscurations is to begin to be aware. And remember that the word Buddha, Sanjay in Sanskrit, just means awareness, the awakened one, waking up, not going to sleep, not relaxing. It's not like that.
I'm saying, why, after let's say we are aware, let's say we're very conscious, and you're still attracting these things. So the whole gift of it is just to say, I'm noticing this, and I'm not defining myself by it or reacting, and you just let it go.
Yeah, let me go on. I think that the best thing I can do is go on. I kind of hear what you're saying, but maybe I'm not done with, haven't made clear enough what I'm saying. So, and I did this myself, what I'm talking about, and it was wonderful in the sense that I'm super critical. I'm, a music critic. I'm an official music critic, and we're a nasty group. Well, we know what we like. So, but I begin big ones. The wonderful thing is it takes no energy, because you're responding to something that's happened. It's not being done to you. You know, this, you know, I take this and did it for 2 years or 3 years just in my home. Like when the car would honk, the phone would ring, one of my kids would come in and interrupt me. I'm a programmer, so I was, you know, totally gone in that, and suddenly, oh, I'm out of it. Reacting, and maybe I'm pissed off, or maybe I'm not. Gradually I became not. But the idea is that every reaction, no matter how small, you have the opportunity to be aware that you had it. But the most important thing is that you can be aware that it's 100% yours. It's you reacting. And you don't have to then say, oh, I'm so sorry, or have any thinking about it whatsoever. You just drop it, and you wait for the next one. I did this for 3 solid years, and a lot more that I don't have time to explain to that would also be really interesting, but it's more technical. If you do this, you will have the quickest way. You will find that I also call it reaction toning. You can start toning back, and you free up an enormous amount of energy, because so much energy to cringe and to be hurt, to have your feelings hurt, or something, I just can't, why is it so loud in the marketplace when they announce stuff, right? That's one I've been having. Why can't they turn the volume down, right? I can't even, my mind can't even work. It's so loud. So that's one I'm not so good at yet. But this is what's called react, and I have a whole book on it. I can't jump to it here, but I have 40-some books on these kind of things that I wrote each one of them, and they're not complicated, but they are something you have to actually do. So any questions on that? I mean, you can try it, but if you're not meditating, you don't have time to practice, you're talking to the right guy, right? Yeah.
So are you saying that toning back your reactions saves your energy for other things?
Well, I'm saying that enormous amount of energy is spent in reaction. Right. Just think about how many times during the day you do some kind of cringing about something you didn't like. I didn't like that tie, or I didn't like that dress that she's wearing, or it's the wrong color. All this stuff is totally wasted. I mean, you can do it if you enjoy it, but mostly, but mostly we don't enjoy it.
No, but what happens if you do like something? That's still reacting.
Yeah, well, it goes for all reactions, but if you like something, that's fine. I'm mostly talking about where you end up cringing and not liking. Okay. I mean, ultimately, if we wanted to have a more serious discussion, we could talk about attachment.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a key part of Dharma training, not to forcibly detach yourself, but to become aware of when you're attached. And it's the same thing. We're attached to the things that we react to. Right. We can't help it. Mm-hmm. But the wonderful thing is that, I've taught meditation for many, many years. People mean to go and sit in the corner and light a candle and spend 10 minutes, but their day is so busy, and it's the first thing to go out the window. I'm saying, don't try to do that. Mm-hmm. Instead, when something comes up in your life that you react to, but you can't stop anyway because you're reacting. Mm-hmm. You didn't have to spend any energy, but you have the chance to take back the energy from the reaction. But it won't happen in a day. You'll have to do this for weeks. But if you do it, and I have some students that, I don't have students in general, but I have some special people in my Facebook that contacted me that I'm working with just to try to help them learn this stuff. But this is the, if you can't do this, then you're not ready for this kind of thing. Because this is the easiest thing because it takes no effort. You're already in reaction. All you have to do is say, wow, I'm in reaction. This is but I own it. They may call me a son of a bitch or something. That's their problem. I could react more appropriately. I don't have to get angry and return to them. And I could, and sometimes I do. But it never helps me. But I do find that by reacting, I've gotten a lot of that energy back. And I have other things to do with it. Just to be happier, right? And not to be cringing all day. Not to be, oh, God, yes. It's like that. Question?
Can you address raising children during some of these mindfulness practices?
Sure. I've got 4 children and 8 grandchildren, and My daughter's a singer, which means that every time that she sings, which is all the time, I'm the safest place, Margaret and I, to park their 5-year-old. And she loves to come there, and we'd love to have her come here, but it's totally exhausting. No, it's totally exhausting. Like this, being here is totally exhausting for me. I'm doing my very best. But be more specific. I mean, with every time that you can stop what you think you should do and be kinder and more embracing, that is Dharma training, right? So that's the only thing you can do with kids. What are you going to do? What else are you going to do? There's nothing else that's very useful. But what do you specifically point to?
That's basically exactly what I was asking. It just makes me reflect on the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, when the child revisits him.
Wonderful book.
He treats the child with gentleness and kindness as is his way, and the child completely rejects it and runs away. So those are sort of the challenges. It seems like what you're saying is all you can do is be kind.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. When we used to bring all these Rinpoches, and I'm in a small college town, and we'd sometimes take Rinpoche to see the students of the college, and they would be, fraternity guys and stuff like that, be rude to Rinpoche. They'd say, well, how's your sex life, Rinpoche? And stuff like that. He says, oh, me, I'm a fat old man. But he would give them the attention that he would give me, and I was his devoted student. How could he treat them with so much kindness? He gave them as much as he gave to me, right? And he gave everyone that kind of thing. How did he do it? I would imagine like polishing a stone gradually. That's my understanding, although he's miles away from where I am. But certainly he's worthy of respect, and they call it devotion. We become devoted to him because he cares more about me than I know how to care about myself. I mean, I'm learning, but he's a master, right? Question?
Yes. When we're talking about meditation and awareness, what is the physical component? Like we talked about exhaustion and tiredness and illnesses. Is there something specific that we're looking at from a point of awareness that will allow our mind to blossom?
Well, I mean, there's lots. I mean, everything will... That's a big question.
I know.
Okay, but let me answer it this way, and this is going to be very abstract for some of you and for some of you not. One of the greatest Mahasiddhas, the great siddhas of India, is a Mahasiddha called Tilopa. And Tilopa had what he called, when he kind of left this thing, he had many great teachings, but he summed it all up in what are called his 6 words of advice. Now, 2 of them are recursive, so I'm not going to try to bring them up, but I'll tell you what the other 4 are. And this is an indirect way of answering you, but his first word of advice is, don't prolong the past.
Don't prolong the past.
Don't spend time thinking about what you did and right or wrong. Don't prolong the past. The second word of advice is, don't invite the future. I mean, don't have expectations and anticipations. And the third one, which is a really hard one for us, don't alter the present. Don't monkey with the present. Don't try to make it right, or just accept it. Whatever. The present moment is like an oxygen vent. It's the most. If you learn the Dharma, the present moment contains everything that ever made the world what it is, and it's still with us. But us being able to be open to it as it. Okay. And the fourth one is, so that I can have this thing. The fourth one is relax, just as it is. Don't try to monkey with it. Don't try to change it. If it's, and I'm learning it in the sense that things happen daily that are painful for me. And also, I went through some just really painful heart surgery and stroke, minor stroke, and all kinds of stuff. This is something I didn't invite, but something I had anyway. And so, learning to make out of the present whatever arises, let it be just what it is. Happy, unhappy. You don't have to get all twisted up about it. You can just open yourself to it. It will make it, it makes it easier. Now, that's not a direct answer, but that contains anything that could be a direct answer, right? Any other, yeah.
what happens in situations of either danger or abuse, etc., where you're reacting to protect yourself, and if you don't react, the situation, might keep continuing?
Well, punch him out or whatever. It's not saying don't act. It says don't get lost in the reaction. I mean, if you have to, to protect yourself, don't waste time protecting yourself by going through a lot of stuff. Just, once Chogyam Trungpa was asked, well, what if Hitler was here, is going to blow up the world? He says, I'd kill him. And so I would take all the karma myself, just so he didn't hurt many other people. So it's not to say we can't do something, or that we're the pacifists but maybe we turn the other cheek. I mean, I do my best not to be aggressive, but sometimes I'm aggressive, But I'm not enlightened either. I have a little bit of realization, but realization, just so maybe I didn't mention, it's not enlightenment. Realization is only the beginning of the path to enlightenment. Any realization means do you realize how to turn on a light switch? Once you're shown how to do it, you realize how to do it, you'll always know how to. That's the difference between, in Buddha training, understanding something, experiencing it, which is ups and downs. You had a wonderful experience. I would always go to Rinpoche, I had this dream, and I had this little vision, and he'd always say, Michael, this is just an experience. Don't dwell on it. Don't think about it. It's not important. Just keep practicing. And I go, huh? Realization is. It also says in the text, it says, in the midst of our experiencing, in the midst of experience, realization may arise or can arise. How to make that happen is what we study. How to make it more likely to happen. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's probably the best I can do. And also, I'm not perfect at all, right? I'm struggling, but I'm on the case of it. I'm not going to not become realized. I want to become better for you, to be a better person to you, to my family, but also I want to have my mind be clearer and clearer and clearer. And I can't say enough. I think I said a little bit about the clarity of the mind, but I can't tell you how beautiful insight meditation is. It's so, if you can achieve it, you no longer need to be shown anything by any teacher, and you know just what to do. You finally understand how the mind works, and what you have to do. It's up to you if you want to do it. But you no longer have any questions, you no longer have no doubt whatsoever. So anyone that's done our lineage kind, there's all kinds of Vipassana that's just more thinking and stuff. But this is beyond thought. This is like, I don't know how to say it. It's like, it's not what you see. The seeing itself is what you do. You're totally immersed in the moment, and you're seeing something, but mostly you're seeing itself. You're one with the seeing. So that's what ineffable means. That you can't use words. So, any other questions? We have a few more minutes, and there's many more books I could go on. I just didn't get to them because not enough time. But question?
Yes, I'd like to go back to the heliocentric chart.
Go ahead.
Do you use this chart for current events or?
Totally, if you can. I mean, it's a chart. You can do it with transits, progressions. The point is, I tend not to do much of that because what I get from it is so satisfying. And with clients, often I never get to the geochart because we spend the time talking about what they are in depth, and they're soaking that up.
But I mean, in terms of if you're looking at that chart and what they say, should I move? Should I start a new job? These kinds of questions about life direction and in terms of.
You mean like horror astrology? Mm-hmm. In general, I think that you're better off with horary astrology using the geochart, because the geochart is the chart of our karma and circumstances. I'm not a great horary astrologer, but there's some of them are here. Lee Lehman knows a lot about horary astrology, for example, and there's many other people. Question? Do you raise your hand?
Yes. How do we, because we all have different programs. Like I use IO and I use time passages. I haven't seen the helio chart.
It's in there.
It is.
Either that or it's not a very good program. Okay. But I mean, solar fire, it's standard chart. It's a coordinate system. It's not like an extra. Yeah.
What do you do when a client doesn't have a good time? How do you rectify it and you don't rectify it?
Just so you know, in heliocentric, all the patterns aren't moving that fast. You don't need a birth time. I seldom use a birth time except if they want to look at their Saturn cycles with the houses and stuff like that. I don't need it. Most of the time, all I need is the birth date and year. So if you can be happy with that, the helio chart doesn't require any more detail than that. It's just what you're looking for is that, and also the orbs are so general, so wide. Helio just says, is there something there that looks like a pattern? Is it kind of like a T-square, or is it kind of like a grand triangle, or is it nothing we know of? Even if it's sloppy. So we're not looking for, we're not lost in this whole exactness thing, although it can be exact. It's just like, it's like if I were to drive to Chicago and I get stuck in Gary, Indiana, I'm kind of near Chicago, right? So that's the idea. Any other? Yep.
Yeah. Michael, when comparing to the same planet in a geochart versus a heliochart, you were mentioning how the position in the heliochart led to some greater realization. Can you think of an example?
You mean led to some greater realization? But what I did say was that in the beginning I compared the positions of the two planets and tried to make up, to my mind, some interpretation. But I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, like when you're putting the geochart and the heliochart side by side.
And then what?
When you see the same planet in two different positions.
Oh, well, there they are in two different positions. But one of the things you see, though, is that, like I just saw it this morning with someone's chart, in the geochart, say Mercury, was nowhere near Saturn. But in the heliochart, it was exactly conjunct. And that person, whoa, that's to them a big deal. And it's true of myself. Like, I have Venus in my geochart in Leo, 19 degrees Leo. But in the heliochart, it's exactly within a degree or something conjunct Neptune. I didn't know that, right? And that's what was really happening in the sky. The Earth chart didn't see it that way. It saw the Mercury way off here. Like, anyway, you got that idea?
So it's more like declination? Is it declination only? Or
No, declinations have to do with right ascension. It has to do with Earth coordinates, right? And you can project them on the sky, of course. But it's not particularly that. Yeah.
I wonder, is there different meditation for different charts? For example, the Neptune in 4th house, your meditation in your house, and Neptune in the 10th house, meditation in the public.
No, in helio charts you have no houses.
Yeah.
No houses, and the moon is part of the Earth system. So just like all the planets, many have different moons, but we consider them part. So do you think different charts need a different meditation? No. To me, meditation is something you and we need to learn. Doing guided meditations or meditations on this chart, it's fine. But to me, that's kind of like relaxation stuff. That isn't what the Buddha had in mind. What the Buddha had in mind is we wake up. We become aware. Like aware of our reactions, all kinds of stuff. So I know there's just tons of kinds of meditation, right? And I don't know them all, so I can't really say, I don't do them. Just because, I just don't do them. I'm totally trying to be present. Remember what I said, if anything, about the present moment? I'm working really hard to be in the moment, all the time. And to be in the moment, you don't just be in the moment, you have to relax enough to allow the moment to present itself to you. You can't go get it. It's just so tricky stuff. Anyway, I think we're done, guys. So, thanks.